This girl, Helen, thinks she can scatter my home with prayers. I will make her regret getting married to this family.
Thank you, Jesus, for your mercy and grace. You are the Alpha and Omega. I worship you today.
Helen must be taught a lesson she will never forget in her lifetime. She thinks she can pray. I will make her know that I'm chief.
They said no woman had ever survived that family. Not one. Some ran mad, some ran away, and some simply stopped breathing. But the day Helen Adeyemi walked through those gates, Bible pressed to her chest, joy on her face, prayers on her lips, she had absolutely no idea that she had just stepped into a war, and the enemy was already waiting inside. Now, if you have ever been to Lagos, you will understand something that visitors from quieter places do not easily grasp. Lagos does not sleep. Lagos does not rest. Lagos does not forgive weakness. It is a city that chews people whole and spits out only the ones strong enough to endure. And in this city, in the dense, noisy, breathing heart of Surulere, there lived a young woman named Helen. Helen Balogun, as she was known before marriage, was 26 years old when our story begins. She was not the most beautiful woman on her street, though she was beautiful enough to make men forget their errands. She was not the richest woman in her church, though she gave what little she had with open hands. What made Helen remarkable, what made her stand apart from every other young woman on that street, was something the world could not quite explain. Helen prayed. Not the way some people pray, half asleep, one eye open, muttering words they do not mean. No. Helen prayed the way the first rain hits dry ground, with force, with purpose, with something that made the very air around her feel different. She prayed at 4 a.m, she prayed at noon, she prayed when the power went out, when her landlord threatened to throw her out, when she lost her job at a print shop and had to sell chin-chin on the roadside to survive. She prayed with tears, she prayed with laughter, she prayed like a woman who had seen with her own eyes what prayer could do. And she had. Her mother had been healed of a growth that 3 doctors said would kill her the week after Helen began a 7-day fast. Her younger brother had been delivered from a cult that had already claimed 2 of his friends the night Helen spent on her knees until morning. So when Helen prayed, even the neighbors noticed. Old Mama Yabo next door would sometimes press her ear to the wall and whisper, "That girl has something. Whatever she carries, I want it too." Helen worked as an administrative secretary at a small logistics firm in Isalieko. She dressed simply, neat blouses, long skirts, flat shoes. She wore no elaborate weave, no artificial nails, no layers of makeup. Not because she was told not to, but because she said her beauty was not for sale to the world. It was kept for something more sacred. And then, in the dry Harmattan season of the year she turned 26, Helen met Tunde Adeyemi. Tunde was everything Helen had prayed for. Patient, gentle, hard-working, a man who loved God without shame. He sold building materials in trade fair and was building something slowly, brick by brick, the way honest men do. He was not flashy, he was not loud, but he looked at Helen the way the moon looks at the ocean, like she was the only thing in the world worth reflecting. They dated for 14 months. He met her family, she met his. And that, my friend, is where everything changed. The Adeyemi family home in Bagada was impressive from the outside. 3 stories, polished compound, flower beds that someone clearly paid to maintain. A black Mercedes parked at the front that gleamed like it had never seen dust, even in Lagos. Tunde's mother, Chief Mrs. Folake Adeyemi, was what Lagos people call Iya Alagbara, a powerful woman. She was 61 years old, wide at the hips, dramatic in her dressing, and possessed of the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She wore heavy gold jewelry on every visit, spoke in a low, controlled voice that made you feel like she was always measuring your worth, and had the peculiar habit of looking at people, really looking at them, the way a butcher looks at a goat. Her daughter, Tunde's younger sister Bimpe, was 23 and had inherited every sharp edge of her mother's personality without any of the polish. Bimpe was loud where her mother was quiet, reckless where her mother was calculated. But they both wanted the same things, and they both, from the very first moment Helen walked through that gate, hated her. Not the slow kind of hate that grows over time, the instant kind, the kind that comes from recognition. Because when you carry darkness in your chest and someone walks into the room carrying light, there is a part of you that recoils before you even know why. Helen greeted them beautifully that first afternoon, both knees on the floor, head bowed, voice warm. "Good afternoon, ma. God bless you, ma." Chief Mrs. Adeyemi looked at her for a long, cold moment. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that is not a smile at all. "Welcome to our home, my dear," she said. "We hope you will be comfortable here." Later that evening, when Tunde had stepped out to buy drinks and Helen was left alone in the parlour, Bimpe appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms folded, and studied Helen the way a cat studies a mouse it is not yet ready to chase. Then she said, quietly, purely, deliberately, "You know, we have had 3 women in this family before you. A wife, 2 fiancés, none of them lasted. 1 went mad, 1 ran, 1 died. They said it was malaria, but we know what it really was." She paused. "No woman survives this family, Helen. I am telling you now so you cannot say nobody warned you. Run while you still can, because from today you will see what hell looks like." And she walked away. Helen sat very still. Then she opened her Bible, the small worn one she carried everywhere, and she read a single verse. And then she prayed, quietly, under her breath, but with everything she had. She did not run. She stayed. And that decision, that single stubborn act of staying, would set in motion everything that followed. Helen and Tunde were married on a Saturday in October. The wedding was beautiful, not extravagant, but genuine. Helen wore white lace with coral beads at her neck, and she wept at the altar in the way that only a person who has truly waited on God can weep, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of answered prayer.
Tunde's family attended in matching ashoke. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi smiled for every photograph. Bimpe danced at the reception. But behind the smiles, a plan had already been made. The young couple moved into the boys' quarters at the back of the family compound, a common arrangement in Lagos, especially in the early years of marriage. It was Tunde's mother who had suggested it, generously, warmly. "Stay with us. Save money. You are family." Helen accepted. She had nowhere else to go. And Tunde, who loved his mother despite everything, was grateful. What Helen did not know was that the boys' quarters had been prepared in a very particular way. On their 3rd night in the compound, Chief Mrs. Adeyemi brought Helen a cup of hot Milo, personally, an act of warmth so unusual that even Tunde raised an eyebrow. "Drink, my dear. Night is cold. You need strength." Helen took the cup. She held it in both hands. And then, she doesn't know why, she would tell people later, She paused. Something told her to pray over it first. She bowed her head right there in front of her mother-in-law, and she prayed, long, specific, detailed, over that cup of Milo. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi's expression shifted. Just for a moment, the mask slipped. Then she laughed too loudly. Ha! You pray over everything, even tea. Tunde, your wife is serious, oh. Later, when they were in bed and Tunde had fallen asleep, Helen quietly poured the Milo into a sachet bag, tied it, and buried it in the compound soil the next morning when nobody was watching. She didn't tell Tunde. She only prayed. 3 days later, the neighbor's cat, who had been digging near that spot, was found dead. Helen said nothing to anyone, but she began to sleep with one eye open. Weeks passed, then months. Helen learned the rhythms of the Adeyemi compound the way a soldier learns a minefield. Slowly, carefully, always watching where she stepped. She noticed things. She noticed that the back room, the one always padlocked, the one nobody ever entered, sometimes had a smell that drifted under the door at night. A smell she could not name, sharp and earthy and old. She noticed that every month, on the night of the new moon, Chief Mrs. Adeyemi and Bimpe went out, together, late, and came back before dawn, and no one in the compound spoke of it. She noticed that there were no photographs of Tunde's father anywhere in the house, not one, and whenever she asked, the air in the room changed. She prayed about all of it. Then one night, in the 2nd month of their marriage, Helen woke at exactly 2 in the morning, the way she always did for her night prayers. She reached for her Bible. She knelt beside the bed, and then she heard it. A voice from outside the window, low, like it was coming from the ground itself. Not Yoruba, not English, something older. Helen's heart hammered, but she did not scream. She did not run. She opened her mouth and she began to pray, loudly, directly, with the authority of someone who has done this before. Every spirit that has been sent against this home, I bind you. Every covenant of darkness, I break it. By the blood of Jesus, I command this gate to be shut. The chanting stopped. Silence fell over the compound like a heavy cloth. In the morning, she found Bimpe staring at her across the compound with eyes that were no longer calculating. They were afraid. Good, thought Helen. Good. She went inside and prayed again, this time with thanksgiving. When darkness cannot break a person with force, it tries something slower, something quieter. Isolation. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi began the campaign in the 3rd month. It was elegant in its cruelty. Nothing dramatic enough that Tunde would notice, just 1,000 small cuts. Helen would prepare a meal. Tunde's mother would announce loudly that she had already ordered food from a caterer, just as Helen was about to serve. Helen would speak at the dinner table. Bimpe would talk over her, mid-sentence, and no one would ask Helen to finish. Visitors would come to the compound and be introduced to every member of the household except Helen, who would be standing right there and simply not acknowledged. When Tunde worked late, which was often because he was building his business, Helen was alone in the compound with them. Those evenings were long. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi would sit in the parlour, receiving guests, laughing her big laugh, holding court, and Helen would be in the boys' quarters by herself, with her Bible and her prayers. But here is what they did not understand about Helen. Silence was not punishment to her. Silence was where she met God. So while they meant to break her with loneliness, they were actually giving her more time to pray. And while they thought her prayers were noise,
meaningless religious chanting from an odd, stubborn girl, those prayers were doing something. Something they could not see yet.
Tunde began to notice his wife's eyes had a peace in them that unnerved him slightly. Not because it was wrong, but because he knew what she was going through, and the peace seemed too deep for the circumstances. One night, he held her face in his hands. "Helen, how are you still like this after everything they do to you?" She smiled, touched his hand. "Because I know something they don't know yet," she said. He didn't ask what. He wouldn't have understood then, but he would. It was in the 5th month that the first real crack appeared. Tunde came home from work looking pale. He sat on the edge of the bed and was quiet for a long time. Helen waited. Finally, he spoke. "My mother, she came to the office today. She spoke to my business partner. She told him things about our finances, things that were private, things only someone who had gone through our documents would know." Helen said nothing. "She is trying to destroy my business, Helen, her own son's business." The word hung in the air. Helen reached across and took his hand. "Tunde, I need to tell you some things. I have been waiting because I wanted to be sure, but I am sure now." And she told him about the Milo, about the cat, about the midnight chanting, about the padlocked room, about the missing father, about every small thing she had stored up in prayer and silence for 5 months. Tunde listened. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window. He was quiet for so long she thought he had stopped breathing. Then he said, "My father did not die of a heart attack." She waited. "I was 12 years old when he died. Everyone said it was his heart, but I remember he had started asking questions about my mother, about where she went at night, about the room at the back. And then 1 week later, he was gone." He turned to face her. "I buried it, Helen. I buried it because I was a child and I had no one, and she was all I had. But I buried it alive. And now it is digging itself out." Helen rose from the bed and stood beside him. "Then we face it," she said, "together, the way people of God face darkness, not with our hands, with prayer." Tunde looked at his wife, really looked at her, maybe for the first time, and something in his chest cracked open. "I am afraid," he whispered. "I know," she said, "but fear is just faith walking backwards. Let us turn it around." They prayed together that night. For the first time, Tunde prayed with his wife, not politely, not performatively, but from the deep, scared, honest place where real prayer comes from. And somewhere in the house, something shifted. The family did not take the shift lightly. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi had felt it too, that shift in the spiritual atmosphere of her compound. And like all people who operate in darkness, she recognized the threat. The attacks intensified. Helen began to experience things she had never experienced before. She would wake in the night, gasping, from dreams she could not remember. Strange marks appeared on her skin, 3 thin lines, like scratches on her left forearm that were not there when she went to bed and were gone by morning. Her appetite disappeared. She grew thin in a way that worried Tunde. The circles under her eyes deepened. And then, on a Tuesday evening in the 7th month, she collapsed. Just dropped, in the middle of the room. Tunde had gone to the market. She was alone. She lay on the floor for 20 minutes before she could move again. When Tunde came home and found her, she was sitting up against the wall, Bible open on her lap, whispering prayers with a voice that was barely there. He wept. He held her. He said, "We are leaving. Tonight, we are leaving this compound." "Not yet," she said. "Helen!" "Not yet, Tunde. I am not finished." He stared at her. "What do you mean you are not finished? You collapsed. You could have—" "The work is not finished," she said again, calmly, firmly, with eyes that did not look like the eyes of someone who had just fainted on a tile floor. "God did not bring me into this family to run. He brought me here to expose what is in the dark, and it is almost time." Tunde sat back. He ran his hands over his face. "Helen," he said quietly, "who are you?" She almost smiled. Just a woman who prays. But she was afraid. Let us not romanticize this. She was terrified. Every morning she woke and checked the marks on her skin and fought the fear back down her throat and opened her Bible and prayed. Not because she felt powerful, but because she knew that if she stopped, even for one morning, the fear would swallow her. This is what faith looks like from the inside. Not confidence, not ease, just the daily decision to keep going, even when your knees are shaking. She kept going. She began a 21-day fast. No food between 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Every lunch break at her job was spent in quiet prayer. Every evening, every early morning. And she prayed specific things. She prayed that every hidden thing in that compound would be brought to light. She prayed that every covenant, every agreement with darkness would be broken. She prayed that confusion would enter the camp of her enemies. She prayed for Tunde's father, the man who had died asking questions, and she prayed for justice. She prayed for Chief Mrs. Adeyemi, not for her destruction, this is important, but for her exposure, for whatever had a hold of that woman to be loosened, for light to come. On the 14th day of the fast, Bimpe stopped eating. Nobody noticed at first, but by day 17, Bimpe had lost weight visibly and was walking through the compound with a wild, distracted look in her eyes, like a woman who could hear something nobody else could hear. On day 19, she knocked on the door of the boys' quarters. Helen opened it. Bimpe stood there, disheveled, shaking, and she said, "I cannot sleep. I haven't slept in 4 days. Every time I close my eyes, I see things we did, things Mama did. I see your prayers like fire, Helen, like actual fire, and it is burning everything." Helen said nothing. "Make it stop," Bimpe whispered. Helen looked at her sister-in-law, the woman who had promised her hell, the woman who had tried to poison her, the woman who had chanted in the dark, and she felt something unexpected. Compassion. "I cannot make it stop," Helen said quietly, "but God can. Come in." On the 21st day of the fast, it happened. Helen did not plan it. Nobody planned it. It began at 11 in the morning on a Sunday. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi was in the parlour, seated in her favorite chair, receiving a phone call from one of her society friends, laughing, dismissing, performing normalcy. And then she stopped mid-sentence. Her friend was still talking. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi's face went slack. Her phone dropped from her hand. Her eyes went wide, the way eyes go wide when you see something only you can see. She stood up. She walked to the center of the parlour, and she began to talk. Not to anyone in the room, to the air, to the ceiling, to whatever was inside her chest that had been waiting for years for this moment. "I did it," she said, conversationally, like she was reporting the weather. Her house girl froze in the doorway. "I am the one who gave him the medicine. He was asking too many questions. He wanted to leave the society. He said he was going to expose everything. So I gave him the medicine and I watched him go." The house girl ran.
By the time the household had gathered, Bimpe, 2 visiting relatives, Tunde, who had just arrived home from church with Helen, Chief Mrs. Adeyemi was still talking. She spoke for 40 minutes. She confessed everything. The society they had been part of since before Tunde was born, the covenant she had made before his father died, the 3 women before Helen, what really happened to them, the things she had put in the boys' quarters before Helen arrived, the contents of the padlocked room, the children she had offered, the blood she had exchanged. 40 minutes.
Tunde stood absolutely still through all of it. His face did not move. He did not blink. He held Helen's hand in both of his, and his grip tightened with every sentence his mother spoke until his knuckles were white. Bimpe collapsed onto the floor and sobbed in a way that shook her whole body. Helen stood at the back of the room. Tears ran down her face, but they were not tears of victory. They were not even tears of vindication. They were the tears of someone watching a house that should have been a home finally fall. When Chief Mrs. Adeyemi finished speaking, the silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that a city like Lagos almost never produces. Then the chief woman looked up, and her eyes were clear. Not the calculated eyes of the woman who had brought a poisoned cup of Milo, not the cold eyes that had watched Helen from behind a practiced smile. Clear, empty, exhausted, like someone who had been carrying a body for 30 years and had finally set it down. She looked at Helen, and she said, in a voice that barely made it across the room, "Forgive me." The story does not end the way stories in movies end. There was no dramatic courtroom, no triumphant parade, no moment where Helen stood on a hilltop and received a trophy for endurance. Life is rarely that clean.
Chief Mrs. Adeyemi was taken in for questioning by the police. A relative who had heard the confession made sure of that. Bimpe, crushed under the weight of everything she had been part of, gave her own statement. The padlocked room was opened by the authorities, and what was found inside we will not describe in detail because some things are better left to the imagination, confirmed what had been confessed. The family name, which had gleamed so brightly from the outside, cracked open like a rotten fruit. And Tunde grieved. This is important to say. He did not celebrate. He wept for his father, finally, after 20 years of pretending there was nothing to weep about. He wept for the childhood that had been built on a lie. He wept for the women who had come before Helen and had not survived. He wept for his mother, not for what she had done, but for whatever had first reached into her and made a home there. Helen held him through all of it. They moved out of the compound within the week. They found a small flat in Yaba, 2 rooms, a tight kitchen, a bathroom with a persistent dripping tap. It was nothing like the Bagada compound. It was the first real home either of them had ever had. On their first night in that flat, Tunde sat across from Helen at their small kitchen table and said, "I owe you an apology." She frowned. For what? For every moment I doubted you. For every night you stayed up praying and I told you to come to bed because you were worrying too much. For every time I chose to believe my mother's version of events over yours. For not protecting you the way I should have. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tunde, there is a Yoruba saying, Àgbàdo tó bá jóná nínú iná kò ní padà wá." A corn that has been burned in fire does not return. She paused. What is done cannot be undone. The question is only what we build from here. And I choose to build with you. He reached across the table and took her hands. They prayed together.
the way they had prayed on that night when everything began to unravel. Not from confidence, not from performance, but from the honest, trembling place. Now, if you are sitting somewhere listening to this story, I want you to understand something. This is not a story about how prayerful people never suffer. Helen suffered, genuinely. She was nearly poisoned. She was isolated. She collapsed on a tile floor in the 7th month of her marriage. She lost weight, lost sleep, and there were days when even she, wondered if she had made the right choice by staying. This is not a story about how good people always win quickly. She fought for 7 months. 7 months of being told she was not welcome in her own home. 7 months of being the outsider in a family that had decided, before she even arrived, that she did not deserve to survive. What this is a story about is something the Yoruba elders captured in a proverb that I want you to carry with you. Ikú tó ń bẹ nínú ilé, ogun kò lè pa. The death that lives inside a house, no medicine from outside can kill it.
What this means, some battles cannot be won by running. Some things that are buried deep in a family, in the foundation of a home, in the secret corners of a bloodline, can only be exposed when someone has the courage to stay and pray. Helen could have run on the first night when Bimpe issued her warning. Most people would have. Helen could have run after the Milo, after the midnight chanting, after she collapsed on the floor. But she understood something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to learn. The place that is trying to destroy you is sometimes the exact place God has called you to stand. Not every battle is yours to fight, but some battles come wrapped in the shape of a difficult marriage, a hostile family, a compound that smells wrong. And those battles, when you are called to them, require a specific kind of courage. The courage to stay, to pray, to trust that light does not need your help to defeat darkness. Light only needs you to keep burning. Helen kept burning. And the darkness? The darkness that had consumed 3 women before her, one driven to madness, one to flight, one to the grave. That darkness, when it finally met a woman who would not stop praying, it confessed. As for what happened to the Adeyemi compound, Tunde eventually inherited it, not because he wanted it, but because there was no one else left to claim it. He converted the padlocked back room into a small prayer space. On the wall of that room, he wrote one sentence. What was meant to destroy this family instead purified it. Chief Mrs. Adeyemi, in the end, did not go to prison. The legal case was complicated, as these things always are in Lagos. But she did go somewhere she had never gone in 61 years of living. She went to her knees. Whether that was enough, whether a lifetime of darkness can truly be walked back by a single act of surrender, that is a question that belongs to God alone. Bimpe moved to Abuja, started again, rebuilt. People say she is different now, quieter, more careful, less certain of herself in ways that are actually improvements. And Tunde and Helen? 2 years after they moved into the Yaba flat, in the very room where Tunde had wept at that small kitchen table, a child was born, a girl. They named her Imole. In Yoruba, it means light. They say in Lagos, when the rain finally falls after a long harmattan, the ground does not just absorb it, it celebrates it. The dust rises, the smell of wet earth fills every street. People come out of their houses and look up at the sky and breathe like they have been waiting their whole lives for this one moment. Helen was like that rain. She came into a house choked with dust. She came into a family whose ground had been cracked by decades of hidden sin. She came in, not knowing what awaited her, and she brought the water of prayer, and she did not stop pouring
until the drought broke. Some people say that is too simple, that real life is more complicated than one woman's prayers changing a family. Maybe.
But I will tell you what I know. Darkness that is comfortable in a house does not leave voluntarily. It has to be flooded out. And the flood has to come from somewhere. Helen was the somewhere. And if you are listening to this right now, if there is a place in your life that feels like a compound with a padlocked room, something hidden that no one will name, a darkness that has been there so long that people have started to treat it as furniture, I want to say to you simply, don't stop praying. Not because prayer makes you invincible. Not because God will always intervene in the time and way you expect. But because prayer keeps you burning. And light, no matter how small, is the only thing darkness has never ever been able to defeat. Àgbàdo tó bá jóná nínú iná, kò ní padà wá. What fire has touched is never the same again. And sometimes, that is exactly the point. And that, my friends, is the story of Helen Adeyemi, the woman they could not break, the prayer they could not silence, and the light that a whole family of darkness finally could not outrun.